We are live. Great. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining our CommuniD Live. Every month, we broadcast a conversation with the leaders who have made the mark in our industry in different areas. Could be commercial, marketing, management, R&D. And what we do is we try to learn a little bit from their secrets. My name is Elvio Gramignano. I am the founder of CommuniD, and today my guest is a legend in orthopedics, although I know that he doesn't like to be called in this way, Mike Tuke. I'm sure that most of you probably know him, and for those who don't, I hope you will by the end of this conversation. Few headlines before we start. So Mike was an engineer apprentice at the Imperial College, and then he ended up co-founding Finsbury Orthopaedics in 1978 with £10,000 of capital. Pioneered the medially stable knee, he wants to call it in this way, and metal-on-metal resurfacing, the technology behind Andy Murray's hip, for the people that does not belong to orthopedics. And he also invented Delta Motion, that is the stepping stone to ceramic-on-ceramic resurfacing. He sold Finsbury to Johnson & Johnson in 2009 and then founded MatOrtho from scratch to save his staff's job. This year, a huge accolade. First, the CE mark of Resurf, the world's first all-ceramic hip resurfacing, and then, very important, an honorary degree from the Imperial College in London. Mike, welcome. It's great to have you here today with us.
Thank you, Elvio. I'm flattered to be invited. Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Yeah, I've been chasing you for a while to get you here. So thanks for being here with us. Before we start, two quick notes. The first one is drop your questions in the chat at any point, and we will address these questions towards the end of the webinar or whenever is appropriate. The webinar will be divided into three parts. The first one is Mike's career, building Finsbury, building the medially stable knee, the metal-on-metal story, selling to J&J. Then we will go through today MatOrtho, what it took him to build MatOrtho and the products that MatOrtho is developing. Then we will go through the future. I would like to see what is Mike's vision about the future of orthopedics, including implant trends, enabling technologies, and we will also talk a little bit about Resurf. But let's start from the beginning. When we prepared this webinar, you described yourself as a dyslexic even before this status had been invented. A dance at school, but someone who could build and solve problems that others could not. So you started as an apprentice at the Imperial College, and from an apprentice, you were able to found Finsbury Orthopaedics in a couple of years with only £10,000 of capital. Can you tell us about this beginning of the story?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it wasn't a plan really that until it developed. It was one of those processes that happened. I think to a lot of people as they leave school, you wonder where your skills are going to get you if you've got any at all. I knew I could do things with my hands, but I was pretty dunce at most academic things. I did manage to get some sort of maths certificate, but otherwise the rest of it, luckily, I was at a school which did woodwork, metalwork, technical drawing, and a bit of building work. So it was a very technical upbringing, and I could do those things easily. So it was where do I go? And I was so lucky to land up in an apprenticeship, which were difficult to find in those days. And so it was at Imperial College, oddly. I didn't realize those existed, but I was in the workshops. So I was never a student. I was in the workshops, going around different workshops, learning about what they do, and found that before long I could make things for the great and good professors that helped them do their research. So it was just a completely coincidental start that way. As you say, I had no idea that I was dyslexic. That's something that's only been invented much more recently, and I realise that there's a lot of people who have done pretty amazing things have had that as well. So it's been an interesting start that way, but a lot of it is luck, to be honest. It was never a plan.
Yeah, when we were discussing about this, you told me about NASA employing dyslexic people because they're good in solving problems.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, people like Richard Branson and a lot of people who have actually driven companies from scratch in all sorts of areas, but a lot of it to do with engineering, that sort of side of things. But NASA, yes, apparently, I'm led to believe, employ around 40% of their staff as dyslexics because they are good problem solvers. And yes, it is sometimes sort of easy to see where somebody's going wrong with something. And as you get older, of course, you gain experience as well. So you have to be a little bit careful not to be telling them too much sometimes. But it's in some ways it's now regarded as a somewhat of a superpower. But you can't invent it. I don't think you've either got it or you haven't. But you're missing a few other things as a result. I still have my own version of left and right.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what you want to call it, the medially stable knee. So it seems that you joined Mike Freeman's lab as a young apprentice, and you were studying cadavers, observing how normal people knee is moving under law, and you saw a pattern that pushed you into developing something slightly different to what was currently available. Can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time because, I mean, I got a job. It was after I'd finished the apprenticeship. I wondered what on earth I could do next. And quite by chance, luck came to my rescue, and I got a job as a research assistant in a lab that a guy called Swanson, who's the engineer at Imperial, had teamed up with a surgeon, Michael Freeman, to form a biomechanics lab. Very revolutionary in those days. It was just after Charnley had done hips, and it was an area where there was a lot of work could be done on pure research. And so I was employed to look at knees. I was taking cadaver knees, of which we could find any number at the local PM rooms, and take the cartilage from the femoral condyle in various areas and slice them down on a microtome and do a little tensile test, purely to look at the mechanical properties of articular cartilage. There was other work going on in the lab with another engineer who was looking at bone properties. And so this was fundamental sort of basic science stuff in those days. And it was pretty fascinating. I must have looked at hundreds and hundreds of those, and there was never an easy pattern to follow. But you could tell, certainly from the results we had, how cartilage degenerates over time. But what I was seeing as I prepared these specimens, with all the time in the world in a very lackadaisical lab, was how our knees work. I thought all the great and good people around me knew perfectly well how knees worked. But of course, it's not till years later I realized that they didn't. I was getting to see normal knees and able to spend hours just studying how it worked, how this bit of meniscus worked, how it moved one side versus the other, what happened when you pull this ligament or that bit over there. And it ingrained in me a knowledge which I didn't realize I'd got until as the years went by, and I realized as I got more and more involved with the knee that Freeman and Swanson had already launched in 1970, to a point where I got involved in the next stage of that knee after a couple of other iterations it had been through, and started looking at how that mechanism that I'd observed could be brought into it. I had a lot of support from Michael Freeman through that period as well in the lab. So the first few years, it was a very easy job, index-linked pension that we couldn't lose. But we got into more and more implants, and that's where things started to change.
And what was the role of Dr. Vera Pinskerova in this development?
Oh, she was nothing in the development. She's a lovely lady, a very petite orthopedic lady from Prague. But that was not until the turn of the century, much later. So Mike Freeman has published with her and with others, it has to be said, some very seminal work on how the knee moves. A lot of people think that's when medially stabilized knees came about, but they didn't. They came about in the lab way back. From what would be I shared with Freeman and seen in the 70s, took into the 80s once we'd started Finsbury because we had to. But Vera was not involved in that. She was helping with the research much later. So yes, it's a mistake if people think that she was involved in the invention at all. It existed, and indeed we'd already implanted it in 1994, long before that study came to start. So there's a few sort of misunderstandings of the history of things like this. It's nice to have a chance to correct it.
Yeah, and can I have the chance also not to correct, but maybe to clarify, because right now this is one of the most successful, probably the most appreciated solution for knee implants, but it's called in a different way. You call it medially stable knee, and now it's called slightly different. Why is that happening?
Well, it's all down to marketing, basically. When I first put this together and created a model and then turned it into a version of that original Freeman Swanson, which became the Freeman Samuelson knee a bit later, and I simply added a ball and socket to the medial side, because that I knew was what actually would provide that stability that our normal knees have got, with a very strongly attached medial meniscus. And what was obvious from that day was that the process of knee replacement loses you those menisci, and particularly that medial one, and it takes out the ACL and PCL. So all of that natural stability that I'd observed in normal knees was gone. So a ball and a socket, putting a hip back in the knee on the medial side, had the potential to provide the missing stability. So that was the trick to it. So what we called it to start with was the FS, to follow the Freeman Samuelson name that it got by then, the FS 1000, because it had 1,000 square millimeters actual area contact, fully congruent with 1,000 square millimeters. That's massive. And certainly one of the things that should be applauded to Alan Swanson, the engineer back in the 70s, that he found that the Herx material dictated that ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene should not be stressed at more than 14 it started actually saying a bit lower, 12, but it moved it up to 14 megapascals. You need proper area contact to do that in those early days. And I suspect for real longevity, we still should, to be honest, even on cross-link poly. But in those days, area contact on poly was essential. Otherwise, you kind of got high heels on a lino, and that's not good for the lino. So it was a fundamental that we had congruency. So what is happening now is that we got a few other names. We tried to change it to a name that would make more sense to people and called it the medially stable knee. After we, in between times, we also called it the MRK, which effectively stands for the same thing. But by 94, we'd implanted it and we were off and running. And we tried to get the Protect people interested to take it away. Unfortunately, they sold to Sulzer, who became Zimmer. They could have picked this up if they accepted that way back. But what we did was we licensed Wright Medical. So in the mid-90s, after we'd implanted it, Wright Medical were licensed, and they picked up the term because they thought it would be a good thing to add to their advanced knee system, the term medial pivot, because they thought that's what it did. Well, it kind of does do that, but that's a byproduct, if you like, of a ball and socket. So it pivots, yeah, but it's not the main purpose of what that ball and socket's doing is provide stability, AP stability, which everybody's knee needs.
Okay.
And of course, now there is another one coming through, which we'll maybe come back to later, talking about the modern trend in medial congruent inserts. But let's leave that for now.
Medial congruent insert. But it's interesting to understand that you, with other people, but you were behind 20, 30 years ago, behind one of the designs that now are the preferred design in knee replacement. So I think it's a very interesting story. Moving from here, I would like to go into another very successful product and solution, that is the metal on metal hip resurfacing. Can you please walk us through the story, how you developed the idea, how you develop the ability to manufacture this type of implant? The first time I met you, I remember that we went through all in 2002 to 2003, and we went through the technology that was behind this. That wasn't trivial at all. So can you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, this is enough for several book chapters. But the essence of it is that I'd been around with Mike FREng as part of what we did in those early days of Finsbury. Apart from setting off CommuniD Medical partway through, which of course you were involved in later. So we had saved up enough money once we started Finsbury. But that was after we'd been thrown out by the university for running a business in a university. That was an interesting part of the story, perhaps. But that's very different nowadays. But I've been around also with a guy called Peter FREng, down around where I was in Dorking, and he was a great surgeon, and he got a metal on metal device from way back, and as I say, FREng had tried metal on poly to follow what John Charnley had wanted. John Charnley always wanted a resurfacing. That was the answer to it. He had Teflon on Teflon. That was the wrong material. We had the wrong material combination in the 70s. But other people were onto it as well at those times, Howell and Ann Stutz and others. But by the time went by, and by 89, Derek McMinn popped up on the scene, and he found me on a wet afternoon in one of the American Academy meetings while I was representing Corin as a technical director. We were doing all the development at the time. And he came up and said, look, I've got this crazy idea. I've taken it to all the big companies, and all tell me it's two crazy ideas don't add up to make a better one. He'd seen metal on metal hips from way back that had worked in patients who came back, and he figured that combined with hip resurfacing could work. I'd been around both of those a little bit. So I said, yeah, that sounds good. Let's give it a go, Derek. And that was really the start in '89. And so it was kicked off with studying what was seen to work. It's been an actual watchword in development. So look at what works. It's a fundamental. Don't try something completely new every time. And several completely new things is even worse. What we had was evidence that metal could work. What we had to do was to copy what appeared to be those features. So the features that we saw was as cast metal, hence it's not had the little carbides sort of dissolved into the matrix, which makes it softer, makes it much nicer to polish a knee, but it's a bad idea in a metal. You want something hard and horrible if you rub metal against itself. Everybody knows it's a complete anti thing to do, to rub two pieces of a component together made of the same metal. They will bind and seize. It's just an absolute no-no. But cobalt chrome, oddly, it does that happily because it's kind of biphasic with these little carbides sitting at the grain boundaries. So we figured, Derek and I, that it was essential to keep those carbides in that original as cast material, but it made it difficult to process, that's for sure. So that was really the start of it, and that's where I've hung together with those principles, which then have paid off over time.
But while you were developing this, you were already thinking to a ceramic solution, because then in 2008 you developed the Delta Motion.
Oh yeah, I mean, this was obviously there's a few steps went in between there, but including that Smith and Nephew took up the BHR, of course, and as a result, quite a few of the other bigger companies started getting interested and developed their own version of things, like they do. And so that was fair enough. But what I was seeing was that metal on metal, whilst it worked, was getting some question marks. We were in the sort of the mid-noughties now. So by around 2004, I'd sort of fallen in love with ceramic on ceramic, because Delta ceramic by then had really well proven already. And it had the promise, to my mind, of being able to last longer than metal. I knew that the metal on metal does wear very slowly, but it is wearing. And oddly, I believe that it wears more if you're relatively sedentary, because it relies on the fluid film. And every time you get up from a chair, having watched a football match, you got a dry joint, like starting your engine. Once it's running, you've got a fluid film you can maintain. But ceramic is so much harder, so much tougher against that sort of property of wear, and can go down to a thinner film. So you can maintain the film in the bearing better than you can with metal. And it had the promise, shall I say, in those days, of being able to go to the bigger ball, which is what hip resurfacing essentially needs. Small balls were working well with Delta. I needed to prove that bigger balls would work just as well, but also needed to prove to myself that it would get accepted in the marketplace. So our first foray into that was what we call Delta Motion, and it used the options head, which Ceramtech already had, the big ball options heads on a titanium sleeve, which gives you the head offsets without having to have too many ball sizes, and a thin wall cup. And I knew that we could get down to a 5 mil wall if we put a very, very thin metal shell around the outside, which could take the tension with the ceramic taking the compression. But we factory fitted it so that it was dry. It was a dry taper assembly. Very important to my mind, because a wet taper assembly, especially with blood and bone fat in, as surgeons apply frequently, is not a safe taper lock, that's for sure. And it can come apart. And so, yeah, I theorized that one or two of the fractures that can occur with a ceramic liner, because actually you can lift that liner out with it when the head is stuck to the ceramic cup if the hip is a bit lax post-op. and you don't notice that it's come out. But that's an aside, but it's something of interest, I think, to a lot of people. But a factory fitted, very thin wall cup with options head was what we put together as Delta Motion, with a lot of cooperation, I have to say, from Ceramtech. And we sold it from around 2006. And that went on to be proving, even in the early days, to be very good. It was, you could avoid impingement very easily with a cup placement because you're on a stem, of course. You've got a massive range of motion. Dislocation problems go completely into another planet.
Totally. And you were mentioning that Delta Motion was the reason why then Johnson & Johnson decided to buy Finsbury, wasn't it?
That was the main purpose, yes. By 89, we'd also gone through one or two big upheavals. We'd been self-funded from with this £10,000 between us, between three of us, from 1978. So by the late noughties, we'd had a very good business, also manufacturing all the BHRs up to that point. For the first 8 years, all the BHRs were manufactured by Finsbury for MMT and then for Smith & Nephew. But after partway through that period, then Smith & Nephew decided to pull that manufacturing from us. And that was going to hurt. And it did hurt. So we were suddenly moved from having a lot of employees who would have been in trouble. So I looked a little bit around to see whether there was an opportunity to move some of our products into a bigger, wider world. And up popped a couple of the big companies, both Zimmer and J&J, took a strong interest in what we'd got with the ceramics. And eventually, we caved in and sold to J&J. They, I think, were going through a particularly difficult time, wondering how to handle what was starting to be known to them as a fallout on the metal side on the version that they'd put together. But anyway, they took us out at the end of 2009 for Delta Motion, but also because in the background we had what we call Delta Surf, which was not far behind it, almost ready to get to a CE mark the way you could do it in those days, but needed very careful clinicals as ever, yet to happen. But that, I think, maybe was part of what was in their mind. I don't know their minds entirely along that period, but they needed a way out, I think, from what they had with the ASR.
Yeah, and it's difficult to identify the thinking process of those big giants sometimes. But I've been part of a few acquisition and sales of companies, and I've been together with founders. And I know that selling a company is always a very complicated moment. We've been talking about all the technical elements. Can you tell us the human side of the story of the sales of Finsbury to J&J?
Yeah, it was obviously completely new to me this time, but it became more and more obvious that this was time-consuming and a heavy burden for all of the people in the company. There weren't a lot of us, and the concentration we had was pretty heavy. So as the weeks and months sort of started to roll up on getting the due diligence done and all that kind of tricky stuff of pulling together this file, that file, poring over agreements, of which, any company of that scale by then would have a lot. It was very diverting. So in many ways, that was weakening us even further in terms of our financial stability, to be quite honest. So it sort of became more and more a must do. And the staff were very supportive. I had a very good financial chief who looked after that side of things, and a good guy who was the secretary as well, they were very strong on how that happened. But it became a kind of an inevitable process, if you like, I knew it would affect the people, but I thought together with the products going to a bigger company, what I saw was that J&J would need to keep Finsbury going with all the people it had got, because in those days, as now, moving products to another place is one of the big difficulties. So it went that they should have a pretty good future, and hopefully a stronger one that we could by then offer them.
Yeah,
that was an important factor to me. The people have always been, I can't do things on my own. I needed the right people, and I was so lucky to have so many.
And we'll return to this point later, but now I would, because we arrived to 2009, and then in 2012 the MHRA alert on metal arrived, and the big scandal of the metal started. For some people, it was a big scandal. For some other people, it was something completely different. Being so knowledgeable on the technology, on the product, on the history, what is your point of view on the metal? There is a chapter that I would say in certain markets, like here in the UK, is still a chapter that is not over. So what is your point of view on the metal?
It's not straightforward. It's about getting the technology right, that's for sure. But that is the case with whatever we do in terms of implants that you hope will last a long time. Too much metal, if it's coming off devices, is bad news. That's going to be clear to anybody. It doesn't matter what the material is, even if you chew too many apple pips, it will do you harm. Too much water will do the same. But it's a feature that what happened was so many of the companies needed to join the bandwagon. I think that was a big part of the play. A lot of the patients with all of those devices, which have not survived to this day, are actually still out there in a lot of the patients. So they didn't all go badly wrong. So there's an element whereby we don't really understand all of it, but I think quite a bit of it was down to the fact that a lot of patients were given those devices who should never have had them, and they were done by surgeons who should never have done that surgery, because it's a very tricky operation. If you get the cup in a bit of the wrong place, you get edge wear. Whether you've got the right metal or the wrong metal, there's so many factors, and they are all combined together, and looking at any one case is not going to give you one answer. It'll give you one of several that you then choose from. But what you couldn't avoid was that the results that the registry by this time was bringing to the fore, and a number of surgeons, particularly in this country, were pointing out that this was a serious problem in their series. Were they the bad surgeons? They got accused of being, but when they tried a different one, they didn't have the same problem. So that really started to bring that to the fore. And so, as you say, around 2008, it was well known internally and in closer circles that some of the devices were not performing in the registries, but that then affected maybe the women and the smaller sizes more. So there was so many factors to it that pinning it down to any one is way too simplistic. It was a number of them, but if you add several things on top of any one, and it gets to be bigger. The other factor, which can't be held back really, is that in those days, without the regulatory process set up quite the way it should be, a CE mark, a bit like if you got a CE mark on a teddy bear, it means it's available for sale, which means you go out and sell it to as many people who want a teddy bear. And that's not what you do with a hip device or a knee device, any implant device. It's only the time then when you actually start doing a very cautious clinical trial. But the regulations let you free. And the big companies were in competition with each other, more particularly than the small ones. And I think that was probably one of the bigger factors among several, to be honest. But having the right technology, the right surgeons, and the right patients, I think is what has allowed us to win through and to have since been the only company actually who has sustained hip resurfacing. Now there's a few more coming back, of course, and we shall see where it goes all over again, maybe.
Yeah, because the irony of the metal on metal story is that then, yes, on one side we have the scandal. On the other side, we probably have one of the biggest success or if you don't, success or case study that is Andy Murray. So Andy Murray, after years and years of pain, got a hip resurfacing, a metal on metal hip resurfacing, and won Wimbledon. So it's absolutely an irony to think that something that was under the scrutiny, under a scandal, then also helped a great tennis player to become a winner.
Yeah. To be correct there, though, he didn't get his hip till after he'd done that, and he was heading well into retirement. I don't know at what point he claimed he really did retire. I'm not sure. I've not asked him, but all the same, he was in need of something doing for a long time. But he was one of those characters who, a bit like farmers as patients, they just don't seem to realize how bad they are, and they can put up with more or less anything. You just watch him on court with his training. It is an exceptional character, and to this day. But I believe he's very happy with his BHR, and he's doing very well with it. Plays a lot of golf, but in sporty people, that's where it's been kind of focused. For my mind, it's not necessarily for them only. So long as you got a good bone stock and the right surgeon, then a hip resurfacing is a perfectly valid operation. I hate the idea that it's cast to people who are less than 65. I'm going, hang on a minute, that rules me out. That's not good. I think my bone's good enough. I don't need it, thank goodness, but all the same.
Thanks God, yeah. Okay, let's start with the chapter 2, with the section 2 of this webinar. And we get a little bit closer, and at a certain point of time, Johnson & Johnson decided to close the Finsbury factory and make your staff redundant. And so what happened then?
Yeah, I mean, the end of 2009, the signing deal with J&J happened, in December of 2009. So as we went in 2010, it was heading off into sort of pretty much semi-retirement. I was waiting to see whether J&J were going to use me, etc. I kept my office and they kept paying me, so I kept turning up. But and I was supporting what they were doing, of course. But all the same, it was an interesting chapter. There were absolutely lovely people, every one of them. Not necessarily great decisions seemed to arrive that they then had to hand out. But 6 months in, completely out of the blue, they sat me down, literally had to, in a strong coffee shop, as I recall, and said, look, Mike, there's 2 things we need to tell you. One, we're going to operate that clause that you insisted on having in the agreement, whereby if we don't continue with any of the products of Finsbury, then you have the rights to them back. And going, what? You haven't even looked at some of them. The knee, the adept hip. Just put the adept hip in place of your ASR. It works, and yours doesn't. For goodness sake, guys, what are you doing? Oh, and by the way, the other bad news is we are going to close the company in 6 months' time and make everybody redundant. So I said, oh, shock horror. I had to have a stronger coffee at that point, because having the rights to the products that were left over, they were just going to keep the ceramic parts, so the development of the resurfacing and delta motion, that was all they were going to keep. And so I thought, we won't have enough of a business to continue with, but I can't let it go. Those people can't be made redundant. That's crazy. I need those people. I need that factory if I'm going to continue. So the problem became the fact that I'd already either spent a lot of the money on a bunch of classic cars, another story altogether, which you can find another podcast if you really must. But that was, in the end, turns out to be a bit of a disaster, because getting the money back in order to then fund the business got to be tricky over time, and still is, to be honest. But putting that aside, what I needed to do was, agree a deal with these guys that got us back going. And that's what we did. By given a year, with a lot of help, I must say, from the great people at J&J Dupuy, they helped us go back into business in competition with them. I mean, how crazy is that? But that's what they did. And so here we are still today. But it has been a bit more of a struggle to come through all of that. But it's there's some things you just can't let happen. And that was one of them.
I think this is a great story. And in this challenge, you were helped by a private equity fund. Right now, I would say probably 70% of the orthopedic companies are owned by private equity funds. And I would say this industry is still thriving and surviving because there is this partnership. Can you tell us about the relationship of founders with private equity funds in general, and which would be the suggestion that you would give to a founder to find the right financial support?
Yeah, again, just to be clear, we didn't go to a PE until close on the start of this decade. So, they've been involved for 4 years. So for the first, 12 years, nearly, MatOrtho remained independent. And it was a struggle, but we did. But a number of things that came about since then, because in particular MDR, that has been a catastrophic process for all SMEs. We've had to abandon several of our products, perfectly good products, but we can't afford to put them through MDR. So we were hitting some very big financial hurdles. We didn't go as far as having to make people redundant at that point, but we were facing that kind of possibility. So we then did cast around for private equity, and indeed we were lucky enough to find one. And so on account of what now they are on board, I will claim a Fifth Amendment basically on too many comments to your question. But yeah, they are an essential need these days, because doing what we did with £10,000, paying ourselves only when we earn money to pay ourselves, and making it work, that worked then. But nowadays, there's just too much expense to even start a business, to do anything. In those days, you could do it with a knife and fork upwards. Nowadays, you have to have an enormous amount of investment before you can open the door. So it's a very different field. But I mean, what I would say is that it's important, I think, to try and find a private equity company who will be interested in the business and take on board what you're trying to do, because you are naturally poles apart. They're in business to make money. All businesses are in business to make money, let's face it. But some of us have run a business which makes money in order to survive, to do things that aren't necessarily just to make money. You've got to make enough money. Same as living at home. You've got to budget the way you feel you need to with what money you've got at your resource. But it's not about necessarily having to make more money, if you know what I mean. Money isn't everything in life.
Yeah. And probably if you're doing the right thing, somehow the money will arrive, or the company will gain more value that will allow the shareholder to make more money.
Yeah, and that's what you have to do. I mean, there is a bit of a dichotomy in a way, because what we've done at MatOrtho is still focus on getting development devices across the threshold that improve the lives of patients. And to prove that they are worthy of doing that takes a lot more time and effort nowadays, particularly because of the MDR thing, etc. Rights and wrongs amongst that. Maybe we come back to that if we get a moment. But we do need to be very careful what we do for patients. And to my mind, it's always been essential that the patient comes first, and that thereafter, if you can make money from it, that's great. But in order to make money, you've got to go for sales. And that's where it gets difficult. You start pushing sales, which I think is one of those problems that I kind of referred earlier to with something like the ASR. There's somebody in a senior box somewhere who says, "No, right, it's just got a CE mark, let's sell more of it." And you go, well, should we? Yeah, it's a tricky one. And it remains so, because PE want you to have sales. And I want us to be very careful about what we put in the marketplace if it hasn't got 25-year results.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult conundrum, clearly. Mike, let's talk about the future. So now we're moving towards the last 15 minutes of our conversation. And by the way, again, if there is any question that you would like to ask Mike, please put them in the chat. But first of all, let me ask you a question that is very close to my heart, because somehow I am a lover, and I know that in this topic we will probably not have the same position, but I am a lover somehow of robotics, navigation, artificial intelligence used in the orthopedic to analyze data, augmented reality. There are so many now, but I have seen a lot of your LinkedIn posts that cast always a doubt on the usefulness or on the application of these enabling technologies into orthopedics. Can you clarify your position?
Yeah, I knew that this would come up, and I thought that I would sort of go away and think about it a bit more heavily, because it's an important point right now in the marketplace, let's face it. And so what is driving it? What's behind the whole thing that gets called robotics? And if you look up what robotics means in a dictionary, it is a device. It's a numerically controlled machine of some sort, which actually does something for you. And we've had those in engineering for years. When I learned as an apprentice, I used manual lathes and mills, and you need to be quite skilled to do it. But if you needed to provide a production line of things, that starts being very labor intensive, and getting repeatability on what comes out at the other end, it was tricky. So CNC has been developed and works very well. But how and why is it taken up by manufacturing business? Well, because it's efficient. It improves productivity, and it improves quality systems. So because as long as you get it making one right, all the rest will be. So, but alongside that, of course, it can have a bit of a hit on your skilled workers, because you don't need so many. You'll need somebody very clever to program the thing and do the plan. But once it's running on a CNC machine, as long as it doesn't break down, it can run all night, which humans don't do. But humans complain a bit more now and again if you get them to do things like that. So robots have been around for ages. And so long as they are providing a benefit to the company, then that's great. But when we apply robotics to that degree to orthopedics, I have to say I've not seen quite where that benefit comes, because is it providing more productivity? Well, I get the impression from various papers and a lot of reports that come out that it actually slows down productivity. Does it solve all the problems of getting through doing every knee, or which it's mostly, let's face it, the same, and that works? Well, I think that's a bit debatable. You know, a CNC machine is working on the same bit of metal every time. That productivity then is valuable. So, and at the end of the day, as a business, productivity saves you money and you can be more profitable. Where is that happening in orthopedics, I have to ask? And that's why I put some of these questions up, because who's paying for it? At the end of the day, our devices are what pay the way and what the patient goes home with for the rest of their lives, hopefully, if we've got it right. Does the robot help get it right every time? Maybe that is what will help in due course. But I fear that a lot of the surgeons who then know what to do, because every patient they come across is a little bit different to the last one, and making that plan isn't always going to be the plan that works. You've got to be ready to move on your feet when every bit of metal you put on the machine is different, or when every patient is different. So I'm dubious about whether it achieves the same as a the definition of a robot can give you, because does that work in orthopedics? At the end of the day, somebody's got to pay for it. They are expensive machines. They can provide more problems. There's papers out there saying there's more problems as a result of short-term issues with pin infections. So now there's people developing robots that don't use pins the same, and so on. So I think it's a very interesting technology as part of, as you say, this enabling. I'm all for enabling technology. Surgeons use x-rays from before I started in this business. And you went and stared at the x-ray to see which leg they were going to operate on, no doubt. Basically, a sort of a mental plan of what they were going to do. So having a plan is absolutely essential, but you've got to be prepared to change from that plan midstream the whole time. I just can't get how that can work in orthopedics the way it can, maybe with some of the soft tissue operations and so on. But maybe time will tell. But to my mind, it's still a research tool. And it's a tool that's, because it can be done, it's being done. Certainly a benefit to some of those big companies who then can actually tie up market share. I think that's a bit of a not all that well hidden agenda, but SMEs like MatOrtho are feeling the strain on that one. So the developing people are struggling again, because the big guys are essentially cutting us out of the supply chain. At the end of the day, it's about what the patients get for me, and I worry that the patients are getting a bit of a duff deal, and they're having to pay for it.
It's absolutely, it's a good point. Now, I would like to ask you a more, if you want, philosophical question. You mentioned the enabling technology, and you mentioned the fact that they're becoming very popular, and somebody has to pay for them, either the patients or the taxpayers, but somebody will have to pay. But we clearly are seeing that there is an aging population. We are implanting orthopedic implants in younger and more active patients. We also appreciate the fact that most of the national healthcare systems across Europe are under cost pressure, but also in the US, there is a cost pressure. So it seems that the technology is increasing the cost. At the same time, we have more people that is requiring this type of implants, but we seem to have less money or a stable amount of money. So what is the answer to this? Where do you see the orthopedic movement overall going?
Well, I wish I could answer that one. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we are aging. We're getting more active, and that's great. It's what keeps us alive. You know, perhaps a slightly more honest government would prefer us all to fall off our perches as soon as we retire, and that would be far more cost effective all around. But we as patients have a right to actually have what we've paid for, if it's insurance or under the NHS. We've been putting our money in all this time. We have a right to go in and demand not just to be picked up from the road when somebody hits us with a car, but actually, which usually is pretty good, this country at any rate, but also to have elective surgery. So it's those elective surgeries that get to be more and more difficult for anybody to work out how they should be funded. And at the end of the day, it's, as I said, it's the implant that they go home with. So how can we actually trim the costs out so that patients get what they want? Well, going in for, you know, not staying in hospital too long is a massive gain. That's happening quite a lot in a lot of centres. But at the end of the day, I think patients need to take control, because they don't get asked these sort of questions. At the end of the day, we are patients. I'm a potential patient. But what keeps us going, what keeps us alive is being healthy. And if we're not healthy, we fall off our perches sooner. There's absolutely no question about it. Everybody realizes that. I mean, I was very lucky to survive a heart attack, having flown into Australia, but I was lucky in that I was very close to a cath lab that could put a stent in me. And I was very, very lucky to have two of my colleagues nearby who saved my life to get me there. But after the stent went in, I had a stenographer who said, "Oh, you've got a very fit heart, Mr. Tuke." And I said, "Oh, so what happened then?" "Oh, well, it's just your artery got blocked. But your very fit heart is why you're still here." And that sort of really is something for people to think about. Stay fit and healthy. And implants provide that. For a lot of people, once you get a bit of arthritis, sitting down and coping with a knee that stops you moving around is going to shorten your life and make you miserable. So that, to me, is what drives it. Health, absolutely, at the end of the day, is the only thing that matters. But hence, patients should be in charge of this, not governments, not insurance companies, not anybody, but we patients who are, it's all of us, to be honest. We're all potentially waiting for this to happen.
Yeah,
but the trick is to go out and run the hills and find out what you can do, because that strengthens those joints, makes you better for when you do need your knee or your hip doing as well. So many good things come out of being fit and healthy.
And do you think that Resurf, your last new product, is going into that direction?
I'm sure it is, but I would be, wouldn't I?
Yeah, of course.
We are being terribly, terribly cautious. There's a lot of people who would love to have it, but we've got to train the surgeons carefully. It's hip resurfacing always was a difficult operation. It has to be done right, and not all surgeons can do it right. And that is one of the saviors, I think, I touched on with the robots. If the robots can help bring that to a better level playing field, then that's got to be good. But all the same, you want that surgeon to be able to back out if it's not quite what he thought when he got there. So that's where that goes a bit. But all the same, hip resurfacing with ceramic on ceramic is showing already, and we've got quite a lot in. We've been going at it in very limited and carefully controlled process that is sort of essentially outside what these crazy MDR people are implying to it that we have to do all sorts of things pre-study, but to run a proper study, even with a CE mark, whereby it's properly controlled and you're looking at your results very carefully, we ran that with a safe knee in Australia. The Malcolm model of doing it in stages and looking at your results before you move on is absolutely vital. That's all that was needed after instead of MDR. It was to apply a better regimen for what companies did when they rolled their product out into a launch. But that's where it is, I'm afraid.
The problem is that with orthopedics, you need 5 years minimum to understand if the implant that is different to many other medical devices.
Well, Resurf has taken 22 years to get it into the marketplace. Yeah. That's not all of those are clinical trials, but going on for 8 of them now. And we're not released yet, not fully.
No, I appreciate your caution, and I think it's incredibly valuable. It's one of the complexities of this market, of the orthopedic market, of the orthopedic industry, that unfortunately in our case, the results are coming way longer than for other devices. And this triggers my very last question. That is, what would you tell to an orthopedic entrepreneur right now? You started with 10,000 pounds and a conviction, and you build something that now not only still the industry uses, but is probably, as we said, the best knee design and one of the best hip idea. So I think you're one of the fathers of this industry. What would you tell to an orthopedic entrepreneur today?
Well, I would encourage him, undoubtedly, because I mean, I've employed lots of lovely people, and some of them have then decided to go off and do their own thing in design or whatever, and some have passed through us and gone on to bigger things in other companies, and I've applauded them for that, because that is about being able to realize what they could bring that we couldn't offer them within my little outfits. But in terms of starting out, it does need to make sense, though, and it's going to be more difficult certainly than we did it, because in those days the world was an open book. We didn't know which way to go, so there was no rules. Nowadays you've got so many constraints. And as I say, you need a vast amount of money in order to fund it. So you've got to have a damn good plan that you're going to convince somebody, or you've got a very fat pocketbook yourself, but which is just not likely. So how do you start? And what is that idea? How practical is it? There's quite a few university spin-offs coming out now, oddly, because we were a university throwout in 78, very different to nowadays, where a lot of those entrepreneurs are coming from by encouraged from university, and that's a great way to do it, because the universities give them a bit of a leg up in getting a bit of credence. But so no, I would encourage them to have a go. Because if you don't have a go, you'll never know. It's the bottom line.
That it's your phrase. If you don't have a go, you don't know. Mike, thanks a lot. Thanks for this conversation. Thanks for your words of wisdom. Your story is absolutely phenomenal. And I really would love to stay hours and hours to talk to you about the small details. I encourage everyone to keep following Mike on LinkedIn. Mike doesn't post very often, unfortunately, but when he posts, the post is full of depth. Otherwise, you should follow MatOrtho. They post a little bit more frequently, so for sure you will get to know what Mike is delivering through MatOrtho, and Mike, thanks really for this, and I hope maybe in the next couple of years we'll talk again to see the results, the final results of the Resurf program.
Thank you very much, Elvia. Much enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and see you for the next LinkedIn Live in September.